You are on. Okay, let me start by saying thank you to Cassandra and the women's ministry team for allowing me to come and share a little bit of my story with you. And thank you all for being here to hear my story. Please know that 1 year ago, I would have never stood in front of a bunch of people and shared anything about my life. But I believe God has led me through the fires that I've endured in order to stand here and proclaim the goodness of God. I was raised in the church my whole life. My mom was very active in the church, volunteering as a Sunday school teacher, wedding coordinator, deaconess, women's ministry leader, etc. You name it, she did it. When I became of age in junior high, I followed in her footsteps. I, too, helped out in Sunday school, led VBS classes, and worked in the nursery. Once I got married, I also became a deaconess, a wedding coordinator, and joined the women's ministry team. I also had my stint as the nursery director, which had me in the church a lot of hours during the week. You can say I thought that I was living the perfect life. Well, I failed to leave out a few important pieces. Out of high school, I became a little bit of a rebel. I got a fake ID and frequented bars right here in Burbank, many until closing time. My mom never asked any questions as long as I was sitting next to her in the pew on Sunday morning at 8 a.m. Some days I could barely keep my eyes open long enough to get through the service and just to get back home and go back to sleep. I was playing a Christian for many years, but felt that as long as I was doing God's work, He would reward me. I knew that I was a Christian, but I was not living my life for God and the promises that He bestows upon His faithful children. That's the word that I was unaware of that I wasn't doing, being faithful to Him and living the life that He had placed me in. I met my husband, Kevin, in our church youth group. He was older than me, but I had a crush on him for several years before he noticed me. He eventually did when I wore my white bikini. That's a story for another night. Eventually, I won him over. Well, actually, he won me in a poker game from my dad. Also another story. Once Kevin and I decided to begin our family, we thought we'd be able to fill our home with children quickly, as those friends around us had done. We, however, had a different story to tell. We struggled with fertility and were unable to conceive for many years. In early 1997, we had a women's retreat that was entitled, God Said Grow, God Said Slow, or God Said No. I was selected from the women's ministry team to share on the no in my life. This was a very painful time in my life as I began to accept that God may have chosen me not to become a mother despite my incredible desire in my heart. As I was preparing my lesson for women's retreat, I felt this incredible pull and urge to really begin a true relationship with Jesus. I felt pulled to Rebecca's prayer to pray for a child and would read and reread it constantly. I asked God to show me what He wanted from me and to give me a testimony. Big mistake. Don't ever ask God for a testimony. In late May of 1997, my dreams became a reality when I finally became pregnant. My hopes were, however, dashed when at 12 weeks pregnant, I was diagnosed with stage 4 metastasized melanoma. We immediately got on our knees to pray that God would protect the life of our unborn child and myself as well. My surgeon prepared me for immediate surgery. Everyone was in a flurry trying to see how to do the surgery on a pregnant lady and what tests they could and couldn't do. I was unsure of what was happening as it all moved very quickly. There was no Google back then. I had surgery and stayed in the hospital for about 8 days. I had fetal monitoring twice a day, and that was always very grateful to hear the thump-thump of that little life inside of me. Once I recovered from surgery, I was sent to an oncologist to begin my treatment. The first doctor I went to said that I must abort my baby. I was now at 20 weeks in order for him to treat me. I told him this wasn't an option and immediately went home sobbing, called my OB to find me a new oncologist, and got on my knees to pray for my life as well as the life of my unborn baby. My OB was able to find me a new oncologist who would treat me, but they were unsure of what the effects of the drugs I had to give myself shots 5 days a week would have on my unborn child. We went ahead with the help of my OB, planning an early delivery, and my beautiful baby girl was delivered at 32 weeks, and she was perfect. I continued with my treatment for the next 9 months. Brittany and I got to spend a lot of those early months together in bed. Must be why she likes to sleep. As the shots that I gave myself made me feel like I had the worst flu. Hot flashes and chills would overtake me every night, and I would wake up each morning feeling like a bus hit me. Kevin was amazing, and he would get up with me to put blankets on and take blankets off as I needed, and he was still able to carry on like a trooper and go to work each day. It was in those moments that I truly understood, in sickness and in health, from our vows. My mother-in-law was also important to me in those early days, as she lived next door, and I could call her to come get Brittany for a few hours so I could get some sleep. My OB and I had discussed having further children. I also discussed it with my oncologist. Both have advised me that since this melanoma was brought on by the hormones of pregnancy, they both recommended that I have no further children. I was heartbroken, as I always thought I would have 2, 3, 4 children, as I loved having children around me. God had other plans for my life. Life continued on with many scares coming at my dermatologist and mammogram appointments. Melanoma is one of the most reoccurring cancers that usually manifests itself in other cancers. And because I was so young when I was diagnosed, there was always a lurking fear of cancer reappearing sometime in my life. Kevin and I left our home church of over 30 years in 2018. God led us to Village Church Burbank. It was the hardest but best decision of our lives. I suddenly was overwhelmed with love, lots of laughter, and many tears, but knew this was where God had led us, to turn my otherwise stagnant walk with him around. Before we had left our old church, I had been leading a high school girls group through Proverbs 31, as I had been taught when I was in high school. Proverbs 31 tells us that the ideal woman is virtuous, strong, and selfless. She doesn't wait to be served, but rises early to get things done. I had the same group of girls for about 4 years, but I didn't feel I was making any progress with them. I wanted to be their friend, and God wanted me to be their leader. I wasn't finding the middle ground. When I came to Village Church, the Women's Bible Study Group quickly became my support system. God definitely led us here for my life to change. Just as my life seemed to be getting back on track, and I was feeling I was connecting to God again, in March of 2020, the pandemic hit. It was so difficult on me to be away from my sisters in Christ that I had formed such a bond with. Of course, we were on Zoom, but that wasn't the same as getting my hugs and smiles from my support sisters. I began to struggle with my walk again. It was so easy to just crawl into bed and not have to think about anything except myself and watch mindless TV shows that just wasted time. I had no personal time with Jesus and only called out to him when I was struggling at work or with a relationship. In June of 2020, what was supposed to be the most glorious day of my daughter's life, her wedding day, did not go as we had planned. I was disappointed and depressed that I was not able to give my only daughter her dream wedding. But again, God began working on me and told me that it wasn't about me and my preconceived notions of what I thought the wedding should be, or the wedding day itself. It was about the wedding that took place and the new family that was formed. COVID was still strong, and depression was a real thing that many people were trying to deal with. I kept pushing it out of my mind, saying that I had control over it. I faked being okay most of the time and kept a smile on my face, and people didn't ask any questions. I was slowly spiraling into depression, but didn't talk or tell anybody what was happening to me. On Father's Day of 2021, our lives were rocked when Kevin woke up to prepare his Sunday school lesson. And he struggled with it and eventually called the other teacher in our class to teach for him and went back to bed. I went to Sunday school and church and came home to pick up Kevin to go to lunch with Brittany and Ryan for Father's Day. When I got home, he was dressed but looked very disheveled. When he spoke, his mouth was droopy. I immediately put him in the car and rushed him to the ER. They rushed him back and determined that he had had a stroke. He had no memory of his morning. He was quickly admitted for further testing and on Monday morning was transferred to another hospital for more intensive treatment. It was discovered that he had had a dissected carotid artery. He could live with this condition, but we needed to crack down on his diabetes and cholesterol monitoring. In the next few months, Kevin suffered what they called TIAs, or mini strokes. His neurologist then decided that it was time to refer him to a neurosurgeon for possible surgery to correct his dissected artery. He was scheduled for surgery on February 11th, 2021. We checked him into the hospital, and I had to go home because of COVID to wait for the doctor to call. Many hours passed, and I received a call from a nurse. It was shorter time than I had expected, so I was a little shocked to hear her say that they had to abort the surgery because Kevin's blood pressure had dropped during surgery. When I arrived at the hospital, they had him in ICU, and I was shocked because they had already shaved and marked his head. They were so close to performing the surgery, and I'm so grateful that they hadn't yet started if his life was at risk. We had to wait another week for him to have his surgery as they did numerous other tests to make sure that his heart and blood pressure were under control. On February 17th, Kevin again underwent his surgery this time. This time I received a call about 6:30 p.m. It was a long day of waiting. That the surgery was a success and that I could come see him. I headed to the hospital only to arrive to a hubbub of activity around him, and I was told to wait in the hallway that he was headed down to CT. No one ever came out to tell me anything, and eventually about 9 p.m. I headed home. I went to sleep knowing that I would go visit him first thing Friday morning. Friday morning, I picked up my phone to discover 5 missed phone calls from the hospital, and the last one with a message to call the on-call doctor immediately. My heart dropped, and I started crying. I called the hospital, and the nurse in the ICU said that a doctor would need to talk to me. I told her I was headed over. I arrived to find my husband completely sedated and hooked up to all sorts of machines. I was so scared that I had already lost him. It turned out that surgery that was supposed to clear his mini strokes from happening actually caused him to have a large watershed stroke, which paralyzed his right side, his dominant side, and he couldn't speak. The doctor eventually got in touch with me and told me how rare this was and that the next few days and possibly weeks were critical. I sat with my husband, willing him to wake up and praying to God that he would bring my husband back to me. At one point, they took him back to CT, and I sat in a family waiting area. And there was a picture on the wall, and all I can think of was Psalm 23. And I knew that God knew this valley that I was in, and he would help Kevin to get better. Between Friday and Saturday, Kevin was absolutely not himself. I sat and watched episode after episode of pure evil coming out of my husband. I didn't know what to do except to pray over him and pray for strength for myself through all this turmoil. Because of COVID, we can only have one visitor at a time. I was alone, and I didn't know what to do or who to call. During some of these episodes, I would lean in and whisper prayers in his ears and tell him how much I loved him and willed for him to come back to me. He would just scream louder. I wasn't sure I would ever have my husband back. I even began to think about preparing for his funeral and how difficult this would be. I feared and thought the worst for my family and my new life that this stroke had brought to us. Saturday night, as I lay in bed crying, pleading, and praying to God to give me my husband back, I was overwhelmed by the sense of God's presence and peace around me and that he would take care of me. God gave me Philippians 4:6-7 that night. Don't worry about anything. Instead, pray about everything. Tell God what you need and thank him for all he has done. Then you will experience God's peace, which exceeds anything we can understand. Sunday morning, I arrived at the hospital to the resident doctor telling me Kevin was awake and speaking. I was so shocked, I started crying. I rushed to his bedside, and he said, "Hello, Cheryl." I knew at this moment he was going to be okay. Kevin ended up spending 11 days at Keck USC Hospital and had a long road of recovery as he was strapped to the bed and heavily medicated because of his agitation and wanting to get out of bed. He was still unsure what had happened to him and had no memory that he couldn't walk or even stand. They were fearful that he would fall and hurt himself further. He had a sitter with him while I was at work, and I would come every day after work and sit with him through dinner until he settled down for the night. I began to work some basic flashcards with him on day 7. I took 10 flashcards of basic items such as tree, shoe, sock, car, fish. He was only able to identify 1. I took the same cards with me every day, and by the 10th day he could get about 4 or 5, depending upon his agitation level. During his hospital stay at Keck, I had many nights not knowing what the next day would be like. I cried and prayed to God to sustain me through these extremely difficult times where my husband didn't know where or who he was. God was the only one who raised me up each morning and put one foot in front of the other to get through my days. He was my rock. On February 28th, Kevin was transferred to Huntington Hospital Rehab. While I was glad that this was closer to home, the very first day I had a caseworker ask me about the conditions in our home so that she could get everything sent over that I would need to take Kevin home. I immediately panicked because he couldn't take care of himself and I had to work to take care of our household. He got excellent care from his nurses and therapists, and they got him up and walking fairly quickly. But this came with consequences, with Kevin thinking he could do it on his own, and he fell when he tried to get out of bed on his own. His mind had still not fully recovered. I was still working the flashcards with him, and he was getting better with identifying the items. His speech therapist was very impressed that I took it upon myself to work with him to get him better. Kevin was released after 36 days in the hospital. It was a big adjustment as he still didn't have use of his right arm and was still unstable on his feet. I constantly felt uneasy leaving him home alone. During the time of Kevin's hospitalization, our new pastor had a prayer workshop that I attended. I never really knew that I didn't have a prayer life until I attended that workshop. I began to adapt the prayer school formula, and I felt myself growing increasingly closer to God. While Kevin was in the hospital, I decided that I would donate platelets at the Red Cross every 2 weeks. I went on March 12th, and everything went smoothly. On March 26th, 1 week after Kevin was released, I was nervous about leaving him home alone, but he reassured me that he would be okay, and I arrived at the Red Cross to donate my blood, and everything went smoothly until she put one of the needles in and started the procedure. Immediately, I felt pain, and she noticed that my vein had blown. She stopped the procedure and tried another vein, but I was still having too much pain. So I decided not to donate that day. 2 days later, a Red Cross doctor called me and asked me if I had recently been sick or if I was feeling okay. I stated that I was tired, but attributed it to my husband just getting released from the hospital and all I was doing for him, as well as working full-time. He said that he was going to email me my results and I should send them to my primary care doctor immediately. Several more blood tests later, and my primary care doctor referred me to a hematologist for further diagnosis. But my primary care doctor and I have a very unique relationship. We both looked at each other and nodded, knowing that I was going to be diagnosed with leukemia, just not sure what kind. I went through another blood test as well as bone marrow biopsy on May 20th. 1 year ago, on May 31st, 2022, my world was rocked again when I was told that I had APL, acute pyelomyelitic leukemia. That word is so hard. The only good news was that we caught it early and it was treatable, better yet, curable. The doctor explained the treatment regimen, which included 36 days. Yes, 36 days, the exact number of days that Kevin was in the hospital. See, God does have a sense of humor. We submitted all the requests to the insurance for approval, and I just needed to prepare my husband, who was still getting therapy 4 times a week, and my household ready for my departure. My best friend Kathy and her husband Gary had already been helping me take care of Kevin by having Gary come over every morning to help Kevin around the house. He helped Kevin how to figure out how to open water bottles, take his medicine, and many other tricks in being able to only use one arm. I again got on my knees before God and asked him to care for my husband in my absence, as well as cure me of this cancer that had once again taken over my life. Someone met me in the patio the Sunday after my diagnosis and asked me if I felt a little bit like Job. I hadn't thought about it until then, but yes, it did feel like everything was closing in on me. I didn't know how to prepare for the treatment I was headed into. On June 15th, I received the phone call that everything was approved and that I could go and check in the hospital. I arrived and got to my room. My nurse came in and explained to me more about the treatment. Treatment for APL consists of 3 phases. The first phase of induction consisted of 3 medicines. 1 oral transfusion drug, 1 oral and 2 transfusion. I began my oral medication the first night in the hospital, and then the strong transfusion chemo was on days 2, 4, 6, and 8. Oh, I forgot his rehab picture. He was so proud he wore a USC shirt every single day. So that's my orange chemo. I called it my Kool-Aid. This chemo was very strong, and they had to closely monitor my heart and kidney function. The first 2 weeks went very smoothly, and the doctors were very pleased with my progress. I felt pretty strong and had gotten into a daily routine that included my quiet time each morning with the Lord. The days in the hospital are very long. I filled them with work and watching Little House on the Prairie. How many of you could say you watched it all in a row and all the episodes? I saw them all. And then I had a special angel crocheted by my favorite Cece that she gave me the first week I was there, and it became one of my sources of focal points when I prayed and for my strength for some of the long days. Brittany had also typed up the lyrics to the song we just sang, Battle Belongs, which became my battle cry during my hospital stay. And that was the lead song on my leukemia healing playlist. I felt all the prayers of those who were praying for me, and I knew I would be okay. I also had to have blood transfusions. And had to be given platelets. This was a very difficult time for me, as this was my journey coming full circle. I had been donating platelets with this leukemia and was found, and now here I was receiving this life-giving treatment. I immediately prayed and thanked the donors, and I had also done for the platelets that I had donated in the past. They had me on 3 very strong antibiotics that in itself caused their own terrible side effects. I was getting weaker by the end of the 2nd week because my white blood count had dropped considerably. This was from the chemo drugs. They were working. I discovered that I had an abscess that needed immediate surgery, and all the chemo had to be stopped. My kidneys and magnesium levels were not where they needed to be to continue treatment. Treatment was paused for over 2 weeks. This was incredibly disappointing, as I had already begun my countdown to go home. Week 3, unfortunately, also was my birthday week. It was incredibly hard. I slept almost all day, didn't get out of bed, and just felt incredibly horrible. I hadn't done my quiet time in over a week and was feeling very distant from God. This was also the week that my hair fell out. That's with one hairbrush. It fell out so quickly that I almost forgot that it was going to happen. This also added to my depression. By the end of week 4, the antibiotics had kicked in and my abscess was healing. I began to feel better and was forcing myself to not sleep so much. I began to eat a little more, but still wasn't very hungry. This was a side effect that I hope would carry on, as I had gained a few COVID pounds I could lose. I realized about this time that it had been almost 2 weeks with no quiet time with God. I cried out to him for forgiveness and for the strength to get through the next weeks and finish my inpatient treatment. The hospital was on very strict protocol, as there had been a summer surge of COVID. I was only allowed 1 visitor per day. Kevin and my best friend Kathy would come and sit with me and sometimes bring me food from the outside world, as I was getting increasingly tired of the hospital food, despite the fact that I was given a secret menu. There were times when I could have no visitors, as my visitor pool was on COVID watch. This was when I leaned on my nursing staff. They were incredible. They sat and cried with me on my darkest days, and they cheered with me when I was able to begin my chemotherapy again. The beginning of week 5, I was able to begin to emerge from my depression, and I knew that I needed to turn this around. I began my daily walks of the hallways, waving and cheerfully greeting the nurses who were on another rotation that day. I was told that I was one of the favorite patients, and they would all want me to be on their rotation. I was known by all and tried to portray my cheerful, happy, positive vibes on all that I came in contact with. Finally, on day 52, I was released from the hospital after having another bone marrow biopsy. The doctor performing the procedure asked why I was having another one so soon. Did I not like the results of the first one? It was wonderful to be home and with my family, and it was especially amazing to go to church the next day. It did take a lot of energy to go, but to see and hear from all the people who had been praying for me was overwhelming. On August 29th, I was told I was in remission, and I could begin my consolidation treatment, which consisted of 20 days per month, every weekday, going to the doctor's office for my infusion treatment. Then I would get a month off, and this would continue for 4 cycles of treatment. I would also be taking my oral chemotherapy for 2 weeks on and 2 weeks off for 7 months. I was able to get a port placed in order to have chemotherapy so often. This was a blessing. I went back to work full-time on August 22nd, and this had been a process as I would still get tired and needed rest, but pushed through. On the days I would have infusion, I got up at 4 a.m. to get to the office by 5:30, worked until 12:30, then went to treatment and got home from treatment about 4:30. I usually made Kevin dinner. Most days I didn't feel like eating, and then I was usually in bed before 7:30. These days are long and hard, but with God's help and strength, I made it through, and I continue to be the best version of me and be grateful for each day that I wake up and open my eyes that God has given me another day to live. Since being released from the hospital, my quiet time has increased in meaning to me as I know that God isn't finished with me yet. I know that I'm a work in progress, and he has given me yet another chance to proclaim his name and to help others know who this great, big, wonderful God is that I serve. November 21st, halfway through chemo, I made it to the halfway point. And now I get a month off. I definitely know why they have this treatment plan set up the way they do. Your body and your mind definitely need the rest from this grueling chemo. December 19th, round 3 begins. I'm feeling a little uneasy, not sure if it's because I forgot how I feel after chemo or what chemo will do to my body over the next month, or just plain old wanting to feel normal again. I cling to my scriptures memorized today. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, Philippians 4:13. The Lord is my strength and my song. He has given me victory. This is my God, and I will praise him. My Father's God, I will exalt him, Exodus 15:2. Round 3 was extremely difficult to endure during the Christmas holidays. I was more and more tired and more queasy. I also felt incredibly emotional and depressed. The chemo treatment really gets into your head, and it's so hard to not let it. There are some worship songs that I have clung to during this whole process. Goodness of God, Battle Belongs, and the song Blessings by Laura Story. Early on after my diagnosis, my wonderful doctor sent this song to me. I had heard it before, but now it became real to me. In some of my darkest nights, I begin to pray out the chorus to God. Because what if your blessings come through raindrops? What if your healing comes through tears? And what if 1,000 sleepless nights are what it takes to know you're near? And what if the trials of this life are your mercies in disguise? February 27th began my final round of chemo, and I had so much fear and trepidation, but also extreme hopefulness that this was my last and final round. I had made it this far and knew that God would get me through. Pressing on day by day, sometimes the day would seem so long, and March 24th seemed so far away. In some ways, I'm going to be sad to leave the doctor's office, as they had all become my friends. I'm hoping that I had been the godly example that he had wanted me to be. March 24th, I finished the race I set out to complete. This was both happy and sad day for me. Happy because I finished, and sad because of the team of caregivers I was leaving behind. April 21st, our first vacation in over 18 months. Kevin had a cardiologist appointment that day, and we were driving home to get to the airport, and someone bashed into the side of my car. I saw him come at the last minute and couldn't swerve to avoid him hitting us. He didn't immediately pull over, and I thought he was hit and running us. I drove in the emergency lane around several cars to catch him. I was honking and telling him to pull over, and he kept pointing and still wasn't sure what was happening. I was in shock. He did pull over, and we got to the airport on time. This was number 1. We were going on a Caribbean cruise, using our credits from the cruise that we were initially supposed to take in 2020, another victim of COVID. The first stop on our cruise was the Princess Island. We had a lovely day until at the end of the day I fell and dislocated my thumb. This warranted a visit to the ship's medical center, which I have never done. My thumb was extremely painful, and I had it wrapped up for the week. This was number 2. The rest of the week, other than the pain in my thumb and the extremely high humidity of the Caribbean, we had a great time. On the way home from our flight from Fort Lauderdale to Houston was extremely delayed due to weather, and then our flight from Houston to LA was canceled due to no crew. We had to stay the night in Houston with only the clothes on our backs. We got home only a few hours of sleep before we had to be back at the airport for our trip home. Upon arrival at home, I just wanted to shower and get clean clothes on. No hot water. This was number 3. It took 2 days of cold sponge baths to realize that I had been preparing for this night for over 3 months and had been writing all these good things about what God had been doing in my life, and I didn't realize that the devil had been creeping in and giving me all these things to deal with. Kevin and I began nipping at each other, that we don't do very often, and once I realized all this, I turned back to God to get me through all of these issues, and I immediately felt better and was able to focus on getting things handled. Now that I'm ending my testimony, I promise I'm almost done. I have come to realize what God has allowed me to come through, not to change me, but to do exactly as I have done here tonight, share what God has done in my life. This life that I have been given is a very rare gift, and I've been given 3 chances to make it right. I'm a little slow. I chose 3 words at the beginning of 2023. I'm a little bit of an overachiever, and I like to push myself. My first word is journey. As I have shared with you, my journey hasn't been easy, but I have learned to fully rely on God, and He will lead me where He has me to go. My second word was increase. I have taken this to mean that I need to increase my knowledge and time spent with God. I have done this by continuing my daily quiet time and by reading the Word and truly trying to understand what He's trying to teach me. My third word is perspective. I have never been one to be a Debbie Downer, glass half empty, or a party pooper. But going through this difficult health issues with you and anyone you're close to isn't easy. But God has definitely given me my perspective to see things in a new light. When I had gotten my melanoma, someone asked me if I was mad at God that He had allowed this. I said God didn't slather Himself with baby oil and lay out in the sun for hours in the 80s. And getting cancer again didn't change my perspective, as I saw it as an opportunity to show the love of God in my healing and in His mercy for His children who love and obey Him. Kevin is doing well. After 7 months at home, he was doing therapy 3 times a week, and he went back to work in September. He still doesn't have use of his right hand, but makes do pretty well. There are a lot of daily struggles in his life, and I try not to get involved until he asks for help. I don't want him to feel any less of himself than he already does. I constantly pray to God that if this is our life, that we use it to the best of our abilities and to share our trials and growth through our health difficulties with others we come in contact with. I have been thinking about praying about how I could end my testimony and to give you something tangible to remember. I have been loaned a book called Crazy Love by Francis Chan, and in the first couple of pages, he talks about how great God's love is for us, that He created not one of us, but billions of us in all different colors, shapes, and sizes. He goes on and tries to help us understand how great His love is, that He not only created the planet Earth, but the sun, the moon, the solar system, and the galaxies so far away that we can't even see them with the naked eye. We can't even see them, yet God found it so important to give them to us to enjoy. I think this warrants some paying attention to, don't you? I tonight have brought these stars. They are in a basket in the back on your way out. Please take one when you leave and put it somewhere that you will see often. Let it be a reminder of who you are, but more important, of whose you are. Remember, He created you to be here at this point in time, and until He calls us home to be with Him, we are to be the shining stars of Christ here on earth.